You've heard the criticisms. It stifles free speech, it's ruining social media, it even worsens society's neglect of the poor. Political correctness, well, it may be a boon to earnest activists and columnists. Lately, it has some people asking, has political correctness gone too far? Joining us now for a timely and possibly politically incorrect discussion, in Winnipeg, Manitoba, comedian Ryan McMahon. He's the host of the Red Man Laughing podcast. And here in studio, Michael Taube, syndicated columnist with Troy Media and a Washington Times contributor, Supriya Dwivedi, consultant with Upstream Strategy Group, and Darren Thorne, adjunct professor at the Osgoode Hall Law School. And it's great to welcome you three back to our studio. Ryan, nice to have you on our program for the first time. We want to start with a clip. Fox News, as we all know, is completely fair and balanced. They think political correctness has gone amok. Let's hear from the Factor's Bill O'Reilly. Take it, Billo.
Hard to believe how out of control this PC madness really is. Last night, we reported that a school district in North Dakota stopped children from singing the song YMCA because one of the village people who recorded the song dressed as a Native American. In Minnesota, colleges stopped a student exposition whereby a camel would come on campus to symbolize Hump Day, a diversion from exams. Why did the College of St. Thomas ban that? Because some students said that a camel disparages Middle Eastern people.
Michael.
Yes, Steve.
Is political correctness out of control?
Most certainly it is, and it has been for quite some time, in my opinion. You have to sort of balance it off between the nature of political correctness as well as the nature of free speech, which really go hand in hand. Unfortunately, we've come to a point in our society where we feel that our speech has to be restricted to some degree because we worry about sensitivity for others. We don't know how to address certain people with questions about, say, their ethnicity, their religion, their work, their hair. It doesn't really matter what the topic is. And for that reason, it has also hurt, in my opinion, free speech. Free speech is supposed to open things up to topics that you agree with and disagree with at the same time. If you have a restricted element of free speech, you don't have a free society or free speech in general. I'm very much a free speech absolutist.
How about you?
I disagree completely, actually, for the most part. So what I will say is that I think there's a fundamental misconception of what free speech is. Free speech to me means Michael's allowed to say anything he wants, and I'm allowed to then criticize him and disagree with him and say what I think he's saying is either jerky or insensitive or what have you. And I think ultimately when those who decry political correctness and claim that it's gone, too far or is running amok, they tend to skew older, they tend to skew demographically male and Caucasian. Now, the people at the top are no longer solely older white men, but they're increasingly other voices being, heard at the table or what have you. But to Michael's point, in fairness, there are certain one-offs that I will agree with that people do consider that can be considered to be going too far. So I'll just give you a personal example.
Sure.
I got married in September. I had a big fat Indian wedding. A good chunk of my girlfriends happened to be white. They asked me about wearing saris because it was an Indian wedding, and a few of them were actually scared to wear saris because of if they posted those photos then to Instagram or to Twitter or Facebook.
Cultural appropriation.
Cultural appropriation, exactly. Okay. And I was like, it's my culture. I'm fully giving you full license to appropriate and join in on, the sari madness, and because, it's an Indian wedding, you want to enjoy in the festivities. So yes, I do think there are one-offs, but I think in general, I don't think we're going too far.
Darren, give us the, the historical perspective here on political correctness run amok, if you think it has.
Yeah, well, I would agree with Supriya that I don't necessarily think it has. I think it's important, when we see those clips about political correctness and all the hysteria about it, I think it's important to remember that in some ways, when you look at the situation, things really haven't changed that much. It has always been that if you stood up and you said something which ran contrary to the majority of society's view, there was often a backlash. So if in the 60s, 50s, 60s, during the civil rights movement, you were the one person who stood up and you said, I think interracial marriage is fine, there would be a backlash. And in a lot of ways, there'd be a more severe backlash than what we see now. If you were to say that at the wrong place and time, you could actually be in physical danger as opposed to just having nasty people say things about you on the internet. So I think we have to recognize that the situation hasn't changed in that way. What I think has changed in some ways, which pertains to the conversation, is that it's the content of political correctness which seems to have changed. So it used to be in the past, frankly, that it seemed to be the views which were attracting the backlash were basically speaking, more tolerant views. If you were the one person who stood up during the 1950s and said that you believed that being gay was fine, it was perfectly normal, and that gay people shouldn't be persecuted, you would attract a horrendous backlash. Now society has changed. It's become more tolerant. There are more groups in society, as Supriya has said, that are getting airings of their views. So in that circumstance, it would now seem that we've shifted to the point where it's more intolerant views which are attracting that kind of a backlash. And I think it's an interesting thing that in that situation, now that intolerance is being more held up to scrutiny, that's when there's all this hue and cry about political correctness. I will say just one last thing, which is my own view of political correctness is certainly it can run amok. And my own view is, frankly, you should just ignore it. Because at the end of the day, you say what you believe, you stand for the courage of your convictions, and the chips will fall where they may, and you'll deal with the consequences. If you're in the right, then I believe at the end of the day you'll be vindicated. And those persecuting you will not be.
Ryan, as we welcome you to this discussion, let me set up my first offering to you by putting forward this example here. One of the examples from Bill O'Reilly off the top of the program was Felipe Rose from the Village People, who's got a Puerto Rican mother, but his father is Lakota Sioux. And yet an article on the Indian Country Today media network had this to say about his costume. I might be able to argue that back in the 1970s, when the Village People first came out, the social awareness was not quite there, which was why Rose could get away with his Indian costume without much criticism. But that doesn't explain why he continues to exploit the stereotype today. The only thing worse than a parody of an Indian by a non-Indian is a parody of an Indian by an Indian. Okay, should he retire the headdress in your view, Ryan?
Well, I don't know if he should or shouldn't retire the headdress. I mean, the truth is he is part Lakota, and so for him, the question is, what is he going to face when he goes home, you know, to visit his aunties? There's nothing worse than the anger of a Native woman. So, you know, as far as that conversation goes, I don't know which side I'm on in terms of this instance in particular. The headdress is a trigger now. It's a trigger of protest and also of it's one that demands a lot of attention because of what they actually mean and the way that they're used in our own community. And rightfully so. You know, we have these conversations around music festivals and the way that we see them popping up in arenas and stadiums across the United States and Canada. And so the conversation is important, but in this particular instance, you know, I'm more offended that YMCA is still being sung in public than I am by the headdress itself. Yeah.
Okay, that's pretty funny. Well, okay, that's pretty funny, and I think we should, just for those people in the province of Ontario who aren't familiar with your podcast and the kind of humor you do, tell us a bit about that. What's it about?
Well, so my podcast is called Red Man Laughing. It's what I call an investigation between the collision between Indian country and the mainstream, and so I really look at you know, our contemporary realities by looking backward and forward, and so it's really about where we sit today in the larger and broader conversation around these types of issues, politically and socially. And yeah, we're in season 5. We've got tens of thousands of listeners around the world that are very interested in hearing Indigenous voices, and the internet gives us a space for us to be heard. As we know, representation in mainstream media just isn't there for Indigenous people. In the United States, we're practically invisible, and up here in Canada, we certainly have it better with APTN and CBC Aboriginal. Certainly TVO has done a fantastic job in elevating Indigenous voices. But the internet is still one of those free spaces where we can create shows and publish them on our own and really create a positive discourse around these issues.
Gotcha. Supriya, remind me to send him a Village People CD for his birthday, okay? Okay. Let's, I'm not sure there's a more controversial sort of Indigenous political correctness issue in North America today. Michael, I'm going to go to you on this one.
Sure.
Then the issue concerning a particular football team that plays in the capital city of the United States of America.
Yeah.
And there are a couple of British parliamentarians right now who are also involved in this. You want to tell the story?
Yeah, sure, certainly. I've actually written about it a couple times when I was a columnist still for the Washington Times, and basically 2 U.S. presidents, both Democrats as it happens, Bill Clinton and Barack Obama, have tried to go after the Washington Redskins nickname per se, which they claim is derogatory, that it doesn't have any positive connotations, etc.
It's their name, right? The Washington Redskins.
Yeah, we call it a nickname. It's a name. You're right. That's the team name, but it's seen as the nickname.
The end result is defined in the dictionary as a slur. So, you know, it's drawn attention for a good reason, but I'll let you finish.
Well, all right. The reality there is that there are a lot of Native American groups and others who have actually spoken out vocally about it. Now, naturally, the owner of the Washington Redskins, Daniel Snyder, has spoken out against it. But I think the real issue here...
He's keeping the team name the way it is.
He's keeping the team name the way it is, and I don't think he really is that concerned about the arguments that are going on. But here's the big thing, as they keep pushing it back into the Trademarks and Patent Office over and over again. It's the intervention of these 2 U.S. presidents for a private team in a game of football. What does this really have to do with their duties? I mean, they're certainly allowed to express their opinions. If they don't like the name, if they do like the name, it doesn't really matter one way or the other. I think it really has to be left up to the team to make that decision, to the league to make that decision, and their fans. Many of the fans, and they are of all different sorts of diverse groups and nations, seem to be very content with the name. The name has always been seen in a very positive fashion. I know Redskin as a name hasn't, but the team has been very successful on the gridiron, and they're sort of seen as quote-unquote football warriors.
But the British angle here, I gather, is that a couple of British parliamentarians, you know, the NFL goes and plays, I guess, 1 game in London every year.
One game a year, exactly.
And these parliamentarians don't want the Washington football team to come to Wembley Stadium and play if that's going to be their nickname.
Well, that's the way they look at it, and that's perfectly fine. I just don't think this has very much to do with their daily duties, quite frankly. As private citizens, they can hold whatever position they want, Steve. That's perfectly fine. But to try and control what a team decides to do with its own name is preposterous to me.
Ryan, should the Washington football team change its nickname?
Well, let's talk about the British parliamentarians that are railing against this. Ironically, now they care about the thoughts and feelings of Native people after hundreds of years of colonialism and land theft and the creation of these countries. But let's go to the core of the issue. You know, should they change the name? The numbers of people that are calling for the name change have grown exponentially in just a couple of years. And of course, you will find, you know, some sports fans that are saying, I'm fine with the name. You'll find Native people that are fine with the name. But if you go back to Dan Snyder's own charity, who was there sort of giving gifts to different communities and trying to look as though they're doing right by Native communities, many of those communities that originally embraced the charity and worked with the Washington Redskins no longer do. They see the truth in the matter. And, you know, what I would like to frame this conversation as is a chance to really be a teachable moment in the United States and for the world, to look at Indigenous people are still here. They're a very valuable contributor to society in North America broadly, but more specifically in what we've survived through the past couple of 100 years. And I think that the Redskins, Dan Snyder, and the whole organization, this could be a fantastic opportunity framed in reconciliation, which is the buzzword of the day here in Canada.
Can I just ask, Ryan, can I ask just a little bit of a chippy follow-up here?
Sure.
Your podcast is called the Red Man Laughing Podcast. How come that's okay, but Snyder calling his team the Redskins is not okay?
Well, Redskins, as defined in the dictionary, is a slur. So that's the non-starter. The fact that I called it Red Man Laughing is. Maybe I should have called it Pink Man, because as you can see, I'm not exactly your stereotypical-looking Native person. It's the title of my podcast. I have no problem identifying myself through these tropes, and what I'm doing is I'm reclaiming that. In particular, the red man was always to be feared, but what I'm talking about specifically in my podcast is our spirit and the intent that we walk with is to be a kind and gentle people, and the podcast, I'm a comedian, so Red Man Laughing is a suitable title.
Okay,
and
understood.
that's all been dealt with in the first 2 seasons of the podcast, which everyone's invited to listen to, of course.
Understood. Darren.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to something as trivial as the renaming of a professional football team. I don't get too exercised about this either way, but I do tend to think that if this name is offensive to people of Native American heritage, who am I to to question them on that? I mean, at the end of the day, I tend to sort of think I don't share their history, I don't understand the oppression or the struggles they've been through, or what is a slur to that particular group. So I'm sort of willing to take their word for it if it's a slur. And it seems a little odd and a bit much, for me to think that I should lecture them on what should offend them. I also don't believe.
That's the difference, though. There are many Native Americans who've actually spoken out in favor of it, seeing as a positive attribute.
In terms of what it would do to the team, yes, maybe it affects the team's history and their tradition, but we have plenty of traditions which have come in and out of focus. And as for the team, this has happened to the Washington team before. The Washington Bullets basketball team is now called the Washington Wizards because they were concerned about gun violence. The only effect that had is people said this was political correctness, and then a few weeks later they forgot about it, and the team reaped an enormous financial windfall when they rebranded the team and sold all the new paraphernalia.
Gotcha. Okay, let me hear from Supriya and then Ryan.
Yeah, I don't really see this as a real issue here. To me, it's a slur, like a full stop. So we would never have a team that was called the Caucasian Crackers, let's say. We can all recognize that's a derogatory term. So if this is in fact a derogatory term, I don't know why you'd want to be branded that way. Clearly, the NFL and the owner of the Washington Redskins has dug in their heels on this issue. So. But I just don't know why you would go out of your way to defend it when people are saying to you that that is in fact offensive. And I kind of agree with Darren on this. Who am I to sort of
fair enough, but
wade
then
into this?
At some point there's a thin edge of the wedge argument, which is there are the Atlanta Braves, there are the Cleveland Indians, there are other teams with those kinds of monikers.
I agree.
Should they all be changed?
Well, I mean, the Cleveland Indians is like one of the most offensive caricatures of Native people that I think I can pretty much think of in my lifetime that has really taken mainstream. So yeah, maybe it is time to change all these names because it is 2016 and we are a little bit more aware. And I don't know why anybody would want to go out of their way to be offensive simply just because they can be offensive.
Ryan?
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said here, and I do think that the voices of Native people are pushing back now with social media and with the internet, and that's why this is really coming to a front, and a decision needs to be made. And I think that just being a good and just society matters. And representations matter. We know about the psychology of media representations and what that does to young people. And I guess for me, as a father of two young girls, the days of Pocahontas and hopefully Chief Wahoo will be far behind us very soon. We know that representations matter because of just last month, Bomani Jones on ESPN wore this very T-shirt. And the internet exploded. There were death threats against this journalist for wearing what was just meant to honor the Caucasian people. And this was on the internet an explosive issue, and it really shows the paradoxes here, and it shows the hypocrisy. So I think if Native people are asking for it to be changed, I think there is a windfall in it for the Washington Redskins. There are examples of this in communities where Native communities and high school sports teams work together to rename things. There were ceremonies, and it's really
Well, I've got an example of that. Let me put this forward here, because right here in the province of Ontario, in the National Capital Amateur Football Association, there was a team called the Nepean Redskins. And there were some complaints, and apparently the team has now changed its name to the Nepean Eagles. However, there's the website. The logo is Nepean Eagles, which incidentally looks a lot like the Philadelphia Eagles.
Yeah, it does.
But look at the URL in the top left corner. You still go to NepeanRedskins.com to find out all about the Nepean Eagles. Yeah. So, Ryan, is that change enough for you?
Well, baby steps, Steve. Baby steps. We can't go making everything right all at once. Of course it's not. I mean, this is possibly an oversight. Possibly it's lazy. Possibly they just don't have someone that knows how to work the internet. And if that's the case, I'll do it for them. They can email me, and we can redirect the domain. I mean, I imagine this is an oversight. And I followed the Nepean case very closely, as it had to do with young people and the Indigenous community around Ottawa. And I think that this is a good example of a positive change that can happen when people come together to better understand each other.
Okay, let's do another example, and this one again will be from the province of Ontario, and it got an awful lot of attention a couple of weeks ago when it broke. Jack McLaren is a Conservative MPP from an Eastern Ontario riding called Carleton, Mississippi Mills, and he got into trouble, and depending on your point of view on this, he either told some bawdy, borderline inappropriate jokes, which were politically incorrect, or he made a complete ass of himself by telling some misogynistic humor, ridiculing a federal female member of Parliament, and as a result, Patrick Brown, the Ontario PC Party leader, has sent him off for sensitivity training and has not actually permitted him to show up at Queen's Park since this happened. Supriya, your view on this?
Look, I think he told a really terrible joke. I think the reaction by Patrick Brown was good, and it was swift, and it was definitive. But I think ultimately, you know, if we're going to decry political correctness here, again, you have to look at it through the lens of he was a politician. And there isn't the exact same leeway that you would give a stand-up comedian as you would to a politician. So I think the context is very important. I also think contextually it's also very important to realize that female political participation isn't exactly through the roof right now in Canada. We lag behind in a lot of countries, comparatively anyway. So I think it's important to realize that. I can appreciate that he said something off the cuff and did it, and maybe the intent wasn't necessarily to be as offensive as possible, but I think ultimately, you know, Patrick Brown did the right thing, and you have to ask whether or not he should have been, you know, maybe booted from caucus altogether.
Well, Michael, the intent was to be funny.
Yes.
Obviously he didn't intend to humiliate.
I doubt it.
But he did.
Yes.
And he shouldn't be held to the same standard as Andrew Dice Clay, I'm suspecting.
No, of course not.
And
absolutely.
therefore, did Patrick Brown do the right thing or the wrong thing here?
He did what he had to do in this case. Unfortunately, the big problem was Jack McLaren was one of his earliest political supporters, and it's always very hard to go after someone who's been loyal to you for that long. And sensitivity training, I mean, quite frankly, is a non-starter. It's a silly little thing that people get sent to. But what he was trying to do was he was trying to state that, look, we understand that you were not trying to be a bigot, but you handled the episode so poorly that you have to go, you know, behind the scenes for a little while. This is where I sort of went back to with political correctness, and I think this is one of the other issues, is that people don't think about the words that they use. And this is the one thing I have with it. Even though I'm opposed to political correctness, there are always better ways to say certain things.
Well, wait, though, is this political correctness, or is this a guy, you know, being misogynistic and stupid?
No,
that's not political correctness.
Well, I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, unfortunately, this is a guy who really didn't think of what he was doing at that time. He didn't really think of the repercussions after he said it. He thought it was a closed room. He thought it was funny. He didn't think it would go past that. He made a huge error in judgment, and unfortunately, this is what happens sometimes in politics. This is what happens sometimes in government. Even if you don't necessarily always get, shall we say, the best and the brightest in this profession. And for that reason, you do get some others who just act very poorly. He made a bad decision.
Darren, if you were the leader, would you have kicked him out of caucus entirely?
I don't know that I would have kicked him out of caucus entirely. I do take the sensitivity training as a serious issue and something that should be considered more seriously than some people do. You know, I do think you have to have an appropriate response, and if there's repeated examples of this, then you need to think about it. I will say this, though, that sometimes it seems when we're talking about political correctness, the arguments against political correctness are sort of grounded in the notion that there's no need for this, that we don't live in a society where there are sort of hateful views. And I think sometimes we have to recognize, and I'm not applying this to the last case, so let me make that very clear. This has nothing to do with McLaren. But I think just generally speaking, if people come forward, sometimes when people come forward and say something and then everyone else turns around and says, wow, that's kind of a bigoted statement, or that person's sort of a bigot, it might actually be because that person's a bigot. You know, every now and again, we are not beyond that at that stage in society. There are people who just have hateful views and want to release that.
Yeah,
okay.
And just to touch on that a little bit, I find it a little bit odd that we're always trying to discern somebody's intent in a situation like this, because often intent doesn't really matter. If what you said was racist or bigoted, then we should judge you on the face value of what you have said, and not necessarily, nobody can really I can't get into your head, you can't get into mine. The technology isn't there yet, maybe one day. But you know what I mean? So I just feel like we should be a little bit less tiptoey about these sorts of things.
But that's unfortunately how we are in a society. We analyze and we overanalyze as well, because we want to actually try to understand how that person works. Plus, you can look at, in McLaren's case, you can go back through his history and sort of determine, well, has he done this on multiple occasions? I agree with Darren. Yeah, exactly. And I would prefer that he had not been tossed out of caucus. Unfortunately, with public opinion the way it was, and with basically a lot of people sort of getting very frustrated over this issue, sometimes you have to react in a way that isn't necessarily politically conservative and isn't necessarily the best way to handle things. But in this case, I don't think Patrick Brown had a choice.
Okay, with just a few minutes left, let's see if I can get one more example here. We mentioned before that, you know, a politician versus a comedian saying certain things. Politician, it's more serious. Comedian, they seem to have more leeway. Yep. For example, Chris Rock at the Oscars. Roll it.
It's the 88th Academy Awards, which means this whole no black nominees thing has happened at least 71 other times. Okay? You got to figure that it happened in the 50s, in the 60s. You know, in the 60s, one of those years, Sydney didn't put out a movie. I'm sure there were no black nominees some of those years, say 62 or 63, and black people did not protest. Why? Because we had real things to protest at the time. You know? We had real things to protest. You know, it's too busy being raped and lynched to care about who won Best Cinematographer.
Okay, that's really funny. Well, at least I think that's funny. Ryan, maybe you could tell me, you're the expert on comedy here. Are comedians entitled to a little more leeway on this stuff than everybody else because that's what you do for a living?
I think comedians are better at it, and that's the space we work in. And you know, during my time at the Second City in Toronto or touring independently as a stand-up, we learned that you are supposed to actually go towards the fear, that if you fear saying something, that's probably where the truth is, and that's likely where the laughs will be. And so Chris Rock or another a comedian, a person of color, or from a diverse community, when they're speaking their truth, you kind of can't disagree with them because they are coming from their own place of truth. And certainly for me as a comic, my favorite saying of all time is a Charlie Hill quote. Charlie Hill was an Oneida comedian from Wisconsin, a mentor and a dear friend of mine who passed away in 2013. But he said, comedy is too important not to be taken seriously. And every chance you have to be on stage is a chance to tell people who you are. And so bringing your voice to your truth is, I think, the job of a comic.
And Darren, underpinning this very funny routine that he was doing was the truth that if you're black in the United States and working in Hollywood, and the biggest problem in your life is that, you know, you didn't get to vote for Best Cinematographer, or you didn't get considered for Best Cinematographer, as opposed to being lynched or raped, then maybe your problems aren't as big as in previous generations. I guess that's the point he's trying to make in a funny way. Well done?
Well, yeah, that is the point, and he's quite correct. On the other hand, you know, let's hope that not being lynched and raped is not going to be held up as the watermark of where we should be. No, the bottom line is we've moved from there, and now you can become concerned with so-called lesser issues, but issues which are still important. And, you know, I think it brings to mind the notion of, in political correctness generally, I believe, and we do have freedom of speech, and you can say whatever it is you want. But at the end of the day, what we don't have is freedom from the consequences of those actions, and freedom from criticism of our actions. And nor should we, at the end of the day. So if there's any good thing about political correctness, is that maybe it does make us sort of think about the consequences of what we say, and you know, perhaps the impact and the damaging impact it can have on others. And so long as you live in a society where you are free to ignore that and you can say what you want anyway, I don't necessarily think that it's a bad thing that there's something which actually gives us pause.
Supriya, last minute to you on this Chris Rock routine.
Yeah, you know, Chris Rock also referred to Hollywood racism as sorority racist, that it was more a polite version of racism, and I think that's where we're headed generally as a society, and you know, I guess that's better than, as Darren mentioned, as the watermark of being lynched and raped, but at the end of the day, it doesn't discount from the fact that it's still racism, and there is, you know, other hurdles that black people in Hollywood have to go through that white people simply do not have to go through.
And that was the important message he was actually trying to bring to bear at the end.
Right,
which is,
exactly.
It's not an even playing field.
Yes, and it isn't, and I don't think anybody could credibly argue otherwise. And I think when we're looking at this as a whole, I think comedians generally are given a lot more leeway because, as Ryan mentioned, they do it much more tactfully than I think a lot of other people do. But it's a comedian's job to sort of poke and stir up controversy a little bit. And when you're doing it packed with laughs, then it gets everybody talking in a way that's more constructive to the overall dialogue.
Good. Well, that wasn't a terribly politically incorrect discussion, I didn't think. You all played it pretty close to the vest. Ryan McMahon, it's good of you to join us on TVO tonight, and we once again remind people Red Man Laughing is your podcast, and we invite them to subscribe. Group here in Toronto, nice to have you with us tonight as well.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.